we often turn to our next guest on financial football matters. He's an expert in the field and one half with Kevin Day of the Excellent Prices Football podcast. Kieran Maguire joins us once again. Hi, Kieran.
Hi guys, how are we doing?
Not too bad, thank you. So 4 points. We have a new tariff, as we were saying earlier on. Not 6, not 10, but 4. What were you expecting? Something like this?
The stories that were doing the rounds in football finance circles, which is quite a small WhatsApp group, if truth be told, was that it was going to be a 4 or 5 points deduction. There were some claims that the Premier League would try to persuade Forest to take a slightly lower deduction if the club agreed not to appeal the penalty. And as you rightly referred to earlier, we could end up in this crazy situation. The final match of the season has taken place. Some fans are cheering, some fans are not, but we still don't know the final outcome, which sort of destroys a bit of the credibility of the Premier League as this fantastic competition, which we've come to love so much in recent years. It sounds as if the amount by which Forest have exceeded the limits is therefore lower than that of Everton. Everton exceeded by £20 million over 3 years. So this would suggest that Forest were perhaps significantly lower than that, and that's formed part of the tariff.
Because it does feel a bit random at the moment, but if you say there is a tariff for this, that will help. At least everybody knows then.
Well, the trouble is, as we said, they're all very fact-specific, aren't they? The amounts, the circumstances, the financial breaches are all different. You can't have a one-size-fits-all, I guess, Kieran, can you?
Well, that was the argument that was put forward by the commission that had the Everton appeal. They said that if we compare the Premier League to the EFL. In the EFL, you get a 6-point deduction, and then that's increased on a sort of £1 million per £1 million basis. So I think it's around about 1 point per extra £1.5 million. We've got nothing coming from the Premier League, and I felt that the Commission, they appeared to indicate that they felt that made it difficult for them to come up with a sanction which would be universally understood, and this is what we have going forwards with Forest. Why 4 points when Everton was 6? Is it because the losses were lower? Is it because Forest have just been promoted? Is it because Forest were only allowed to lose £61 million, whereas Everton were allowed to lose 105? The rules as they currently stand are confusing. And you spend an awful lot of time wasted on spreadsheets and going through small print when we should be focusing on what's happening on the pitch.
Yeah, because we've heard this afternoon they're going to be redrafting the spending rules of the summer. It's probably difficult for you to answer at the top of your head, but what would be a reasonable amount? Because the 105 million's been in place for some time, hasn't it?
Well, I did an exercise on a spreadsheet because I've not got many friends. And I worked out that if we'd index linked the £105 million from when it was introduced in 2013 to the inflation that we've seen in football, so not inflation in terms of what you're paying for your pies and your pints and your milk and so on, the allowable loss would be £218 million because football revenues have shot up. We've had these fantastic new TV deals, in which case neither Everton nor Forest would be within the limits, and neither club would have a points deduction. So where we are going forwards appears to be a form of wage cap. So we're actually going to scrap these allowable losses. And what we're going to say is that the amount of money that you spend on player wages, agents' fees, and your net transfer cost is going to form the basis. And you can't spend more than 70% of the money coming into the club in terms of those particular football-related costs.
And then wouldn't that mean then that the smaller clubs, so-called, couldn't afford better players, that all the good players are going to go to the clubs with money? I'm not sure that's going to work either, really, is it?
That's right. I mean, football is a talent industry, and the talent gravitates to where the big bucks are. So it does seem somewhat clandestinely that it's sort of reinforcing the existing gaps that exist in football between the larger clubs in terms of revenue and the ability to be commercially popular and so on, compared to the clubs which have recently come into the Premier League or is trying to establish themselves, and I hate to use this word because it's football that we love, but as brands who can become globally popular over a period of time. So, the ability to qualify for the Champions League, the ability to win trophies would be restricted by these new rules, because if you do have some good players, they're going to go elsewhere for other clubs that will pay bigger wages, which you can't afford to pay under this new system of rules.
And is there anything, Kieran, when they sort of change the regulations to do about the timeline of when these charges are issued and when appeals are heard? Because we don't want a situation, and even whether it happens or not in this scenario, we don't know where the football is finished and we still don't know who's been relegated.
Well, I think nobody envisaged that we would have two clubs, up on charges, and in the case of Everton, they're up on two sets of charges. I think the commissions don't like to be sitting simultaneously, so therefore we've got a sort of it's a bus queue forming, and this has resulted in delays in the results being announced, and therefore delays in terms of when the appeals can first of all be heard, and then they can be reflected upon, and results can be finally given. I think the Premier League needs to look at its current position in terms of where it stands. I think its credibility has suffered as a result of what's happened recently, and I suspect that there will be a lot of discussions at the next executives meeting, because what do you do if you're one of those clubs that is in theory being relegated at the end of the season but might not be relegated, dependent upon an appeal, because you've got decisions to make in terms of your summer transfer budget, but there's also decisions in respect of employment. We saw with the likes of when Villa were relegated in 2016, that they ended up getting rid of a couple of hundred employees, because running a Premier League club is significantly different to running a club in the Championship.
And finally, where does this leave Everton, you think, who have these other charges hanging over their head, and it may take a couple more weeks? What are we looking at there? Are we looking at 4 points now, as we say? What should Evertonians be expecting from what you've concluded so far?
Well, one can only assume that the Premier League has made these charges because it does have substantial evidence that the clubs have exceeded the limits. So therefore, a points deduction is probably to be expected, as if the club manages to not successfully defend itself. However, in the case of Everton, again, we've got a unique set of circumstances. Everton have already been punished for 2021. They've already been punished for 2022. And those 2 years are in the claims by the Premier League in terms of the breach for the 3 years to the end of 2023. So there's a case for saying that if the Commission says, well, Everton should have a 3 points deduction, we can't have double counting of those 2 years. So we take away 2/3 of the penalty, and it would then become a 1 point penalty.
Well, we await the official judgment from the Premier League and all the details of it. I'm sure you and Kevin will be discussing this in the Price's Football podcast, Kieran.
I thought I was going to have a quiet week, but I've just about four texts from Kevin. And yes, it's going to be a busy morning.
Excellent. Good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Football finance expert Kieran Maguire. Price's Football podcast, really interesting. Kevin Kieran's the boffin, as you can. He knows all this, and Kevin asked the questions we'd all asked. So it does kind of demystify and debunk a lot of the stuff we don't understand about football finance.
It's quite needed, isn't it? I mean,
good listen.
You've got a situation here where Newcastle could be forced to sell Guimaraes, for example.
Sure.
And then they could change the rules. So they're forced to sell him before June the 30th, but then they changed the rules to allow it to be 200 million, in which case they wouldn't have needed to sell him anyway. And the same with Chelsea and Gallagher. It's a bit of a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is a mess, definitely. Ben Fletcher's popped back in, I take it, Ben, on this very subject.
Indeed, the Premier League have just announced in the last few seconds Forest have been deducted 4 points for breaching profitability and sustainability rules, as talkSPORT told you around an hour ago. It means they effectively swap place with Luton. They're into the bottom three, a single point adrift of safety. That 4 point deduction for Forest now confirmed by the Premier League.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.